On today's episode of Locked On Wild, if the Wild are in year 2 of a 5-year plan, what were they doing for 2 years before that came about?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Alex Micheletti joins us, and we have a lot to discuss. We'll talk about Jared Spurgeon's injury status, and there already is some concern over the nature of nothing being said. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Bill Guerin 5-year plan. We're in year 2. But what happened to the previous 2 seasons? We'll talk about that, as well as what we've seen so far from the first 3 games ahead of 2 more games on the road coming up this week. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021 and credentialed Wild media member, joined by Alex Micheletti. Alex, unfortunately, no victory Micheletti Monday here today. We can count it as half of one, though, because it's still a point that the Wilds got against the Winnipeg Jets. And look, it was a very up and down weekend. The Wild played really, really well against Seattle for most of the game. Ended up losing that one. Tough to really get going against the Winnipeg Jets, but ultimately they were in it up until the end. And so I don't have as much issue with the Winnipeg game as I do just feeling like the Seattle game kind of got away. We'll talk about those games as well as some of the other things that we learned, especially from the Columbus game too. But we got to talk first because 2 injuries against the Seattle Kraken, and kind of got the feeling that this was coming because in the post game, Michael Russo asked John Hynes, if Eriksson Ek is not able to go, you can just slot Liam Ogren into the lineup, and you should be fine there. And Hynes said pretty quickly after that, well, we had a couple of other guys too that got banged up, and so depending on their status, we might need to make some additional roster moves. If it is just Ek, obviously that Ogren is the route we'll go. But it turns out Marcus Johansson was banged up. He did end up playing, but Jared Spurgeon, day to day with a lower body injury. And I got to tell you, Alex, and you are lockstep with me in this. I'm not doing this to do any sort of fear mongering 3 games into the season, but I think Russo's onto something here in the article that he wrote for The Athletic, because it just feels like if it was something that was not related to what happened in the offseason with Spurgeon, the hip and back surgeries, if it's not related, it feels like the team would make some sort of efforts to kind of distance from that. But Hynes was pretty non-committal about Spurgeon's status, said that he's going to be evaluated today. And until they figure out what that report shows, there's really nothing that they can offer. And like it is kind of concerning that that the team is being quiet about this, at least at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect him for Tuesday's game, but with the way they're talking about it, they said that Ek was gonna travel to St. Louis, but when even his teammates are really concerned about it, that's never a good sign either.
Yeah, it is. It got some response from many members of the Wild roster, and it was pointed out by a few listeners in even going back to Thursday's game against the Blue Jackets. They just it just didn't quite look right. I don't recall seeing anything specifically in terms of like a big hit or maybe going awkwardly into the boards. I don't recall seeing anything along those lines that would warrant, okay, this is a tweak or something along those lines. And so at this point, you hope for good news, but this was something that was of high concern going into the season, because I know the medical technology has advanced considerably, but it still is two different surgeries. And much like we saw with Joel Eriksson Ek when he broke his leg, you can prepare in a controlled environment all you want. But when you're out there on the ice, you can't guard against unnatural movement and unintended like collisions or somebody doing something that's not natural, like with movement or something that you end up colliding with them. You can't plan for any of that. And that's why Joel Eriksson Ek, 19 seconds into that playoff game against the Stars, that's why he had to go, is because
his leg just gave away.
Yeah, there was an unnatural motion that he couldn't account for, and that was that. Like, you can train and practice in controlled settings, but games are a whole different animal.
Yeah, and the thing that scared me about the surgeries is the hip, because you see guys and they have hip injuries, they don't come back.
Yeah.
Well, they attempt to, and then they just shut it. Nick Backstrom with the Washington Capitals, he had the hip surgery and then had to basically retire right after that because he just was not the same player and couldn't handle the speed. And like you said, the speed of a game is so much different than practice or training. So, and to have not only the hip but a back too. So I mean that puts a lot of pressure on other body parts to overcompensate. And so it's and for how small of a guy he is too, that doesn't help either.
Yeah,
so it's just it's a hope and pray at this point, because I mean they're such a completely different team without him.
Yeah, and it's tough because you had his first game back in the preseason, and obviously everybody was amped for that. Scored a couple of goals, and you at that point are thinking like, "Hey, I think we're in good shape." But this is kind of part of the story too, that you see is just as guys get older, it becomes harder to recover from those types of injuries and just from general wear and tear. Like, it takes you longer to bounce back. And Spurgeon at 34 at this point, he's had a handful of injuries throughout his career. I don't know. I don't know what you do, because here's the other thing. Like, let's just say hypothetically that it was some sort of a like shut it down for, maybe not for the whole year, but for a while. Do you throw him on long-term injured reserve? But then what are you going to go get?
Right.
Like, what are you going to use that $7.5 million to go get? It's too early in the season for any teams to really be out of it enough that you could go get a top six forward, or in this case, honestly, it'd probably make way more sense to go get a defenseman to replace what he brings to the table, but it's too early to do that.
Right. No team is in position, like you said, and you're just kind of stuck
in the middle.
Right. And when we talk about this, not only do you have the buyout money, but you have his contract, which is you can't be paying that guy that amount of money for the production he brings at this point in his career. It's becoming an albatross of a contract.
No, and you look at the money defensively that'll be on the books next year. Spurgeon, Brodin, Middleton, Faber, that is, you've got 3 contracts that are $6 million plus, and you've got Middleton at 4-ish, 4.25, I think his number is. That's a lot on D. Now you will have theoretically Zeev Buium to eat up a spot for relatively cheap to kind of even it out a little bit, but like again,
you're gonna have to pay that guy fast too.
Yeah, you have to weigh though. Like, is a guy worth having on the roster, making that much money if he's going to be in somewhere between 0 to 40 games? Like, is that worth the trade off? I don't know. Like,
no, it's when you're already, you're relying on 2 guys to score, and if they don't score, then you're out of luck. Which is, they're facing so much pressure on Kaprizov and Boldy right now. It's crazy.
Well, we are thankfully 2 years into a 5-year plan for what is going to.
We just found out about.
Yeah, what is going to lead to this team hitting their Stanley Cup contention window. So year 2 of 5, we'll break down like what this means, where they could go from here over the next few seasons. We'll talk about the Bill Guerin 5-year plan as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Hims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is pretty busy these days, and you don't have time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for those uncomfortable doctor's visits. And no insurance is needed. And one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. That's hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we've got the live show for you tonight at 8. Denny has some thoughts you will not want to miss about the start to the season and what needs to happen to get everything back on track. So check that out, 8 p.m. tonight, right here on YouTube. Alex, let's get back into the conversation because, as you alluded to, we found out shortly before the season started that the Minnesota Wild were in year 2 of a 5-year plan. Nice write-up by Joe Smith and Michael Russo, 2 of the best in the biz. Oh, and they both cover the Minnesota Wild, so we frequently get spoiled with great looks into the organization and what is going on right now and what comes next. So let's just get up to speed with this passage that I'll read for you. In an exclusive interview with The Athletic, Craig Leopold reveals that the Wild are in year 2 of a 5-year plan, which ends, they hope, with a championship. This was determined last year in a meeting with President and General Manager Bill Guerin and his staff, Leopold says. Because of this, Leopold says there is zero heat on Guerin, who is entering his 6th season. Leopold is convinced that Guerin and his staff can deliver. So what must happen to make it work? Here are some key elements. Number 1, team must re-sign Kirill Kaprizov, who is eligible for an extension after this season. Nobody, Craig Leopold said pretty strongly, will offer more money than the Wild, but it is imperative that they convince him he can win in Minnesota. Number 2, the team's current core and rising stars like Matt Boldy and Brock Faber must thrive. Number 3, the team's top prospects like Jesper Wallstedt and Danila Yurov must arrive and be impactful. And number 4, next summer, when the Wild have some cap space, they need to hit on a few difference-making free agents. It's not a ton of space, but Leopold says they have already identified 1 or 2 players they want to sign, and that next July 1 will feel like Christmas. But he does worry Wild fans will continue to be does he worry Wild fans will continue to be patient when now told the plan to be a serious Cup contender is 4 more seasons away? Absolutely, Leopold says. We think about our fans all the time. We don't want to overpromise and under-deliver. I have one question to this, Alex. Zach Parise and Ryan Suter were bought out in 2021, right? My math checks out on that. So why was this not discussed as part of that whole plan? I'll tell you why. Because Michael Russo and Joe Smith, they land that plane themselves. Fans seemed to accept there would be a short-term pain. Dead cap hits as high as $14.7 million last season and this upcoming one. They'd compete, as Guerin put it, with one hand tied behind our backs. Here's the key phrase. But the Wild decision makers didn't anticipate how difficult it would be to ascend to true contender status without a full financial arsenal. That's when Leopold, for the first time as an owner, told his GM that it was time to come up with a 5-year plan to win a cup.
This team never fails to provide content. It's like
I'm leaving that pointed pause in.
Every day is the same. Yeah.
I'm leaving that pointed pause in as emphasis because, and I can't stress this enough, that conversation needed to happen because I feel like the buyouts are a substantial enough decision that your response should be, like, sell me on the rest of this plan. Because those 2 seasons, which were successful regular seasons for the Minnesota Wild, those were fun, but the Wild have been trying to replicate those 2 seasons, and especially 2021, 2022. That's the one that's the magic in the bottle that has been attempted to be recreated by Bill Guerin doing his best Dr. Frankenstein impression, trying to bring the monster back to life by using a little lightning from 2021, 2022. But guess what? The circuits have fried, and it's not working at the same level.
Well, we were joking off air about the AHL team, and they're off to a disastrous start. And part of this, this plan was to get better depth. The guys they signed down there, they're not helping the young guys. It seems like there's a disconnect between the 2 groups of players that they've drafted and then these veterans that they've signed.
So it, like, basically what we get is that, and there was we knew full well once the buyouts happened that would provide some initial cap relief. And so a little bit of a short-term, like, go for it window, but it didn't lead to anything other than just an additional
it led to rushed contract extensions.
Yeah.
It was kind of panic moves. It kind of, he said, these are the guys that he brought in. So then he had to reward the guys, even if it didn't make 100%, to make the extensions before you saw, what happened. And now these guys are aging too, which is scary. And the no moves. And so, it's just kind of all, it's all colliding at the same time. And it's crazy. You and I talked about it off air too. It seems like this season is turning out to be the exact season last year was, and you're having early injuries again, and it's the same guy. It's which is crazy. It's Spurgeon again.
So I guess, year 2 of this plan, and I guess the way to spin this in a positive light, is that by the time the season is done, the hope is that you'll have more of a full-time role for Jesper.
Get Johansson out of there.
And for Liam Ogren. So is that enough? So is that enough in year 2 to say, okay, by the end of the season, we're going to have Liam Ogren, Jesper Wallstedt, and Zeev Boyum playing regularly, like with regular spots? Is that enough to consider it progress going forward in year 2? Maybe. But then year 3 becomes, okay, we're going to have Danila Yurov here. We're going to give Riley Heidt another crack to try to make the roster. I guess I just what is, besides those bullet points, which guess what? You can identify whoever you want as free agent targets. That's honestly that is probably the one that is circled the darkest and most bold.
That has to be Craig Leopold's. He just won't say it just because it would cause chaos,
cause ramifications. But here's the other part: you're going to be bidding against the rest of the league who has more money to offer, because they don't have a bunch of these contracts that are weighing things down. And
left on contracts.
You got to hit on impact free agents. It's still I have thought that Yakov Trenin has had some good moments so far. It's still too early, I think, to form an opinion on that, but he's basically Marcus Foligno. So you have 2 of those guys. Jakub Lauko looked really good in the preseason and he's had some, he works hard. He plays hard.
Right.
So he's always going to look like, but he's, at the end of the day, he's a 4th line guy.
Right.
And so it was kind of the same thing going into this season, where it's like you have a little money to spend on an impact free agent, and you go out and you just add more bottom 6 guys to the fold.
Right. And the 3rd line's becoming an issue. They're not doing anything offensively, which you would hope you see these other teams in the division, and you have the
Dallas.
Dallas. I mean, they have one of the best 3rd lines in the league. They make it easy. They make it look easy. The Wild, they make it impossible at times for the bottom 6 to help contribute.
Yeah. So the Dallas Stars, as of right now, Jamie Benn, Wyatt Johnston, and Logan Stankoven on their 3rd line.
Are you kidding me? That would be a lot of first teams, and they're on the 3rd line. And Jamie Benn always gets they stick him with the young guys, which is it's always interesting.
Yeah, he's just along for the ride. But I don't know. I hear something like that, and I just am kind of like, maybe you don't have to announce that or fully flesh it out before it gets out there, because just like the contracts, like you said, just feels kind of rushed. And what were the last 2 seasons for if they weren't part of your plan?
Right.
To try to make the playoffs when you know that you are financially handicapped in a way that is going to be tough to do. it kind of strikes me as reading a book report without reading the book.
And it's just something that probably like the Twins and their debacles with PR, it's probably something that should have never even been said publicly.
If Craig Leopold says right size the business, I'm going to have...
Because people are going to be like, well, here's year 5. Where's our cup?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you've put that out there now into the world, and if we get 3 seasons after this down the road and it hasn't happened, there was a line in there. Could it end up taking 6? We have to consider that. It's like, I would have put a little more thought and a little more detail into the plan the moment that Parise and Suter were bought out.
Right, and obviously then the Kaprizov, that's the biggest conundrum. And what are you going to do once Zuccarello's done? He's not going to be able to play forever. So
no.
Who's gonna step up to, do they eventually put Boldy and Kaprizov together? I mean, you might have to.
Yeah, that is a question that may have to be answered this year, if not probably next year too. But I don't know. Much like I don't know what to think of the first 3 games of the season. I will say I think the battle level has been much better, because at points last year they were just getting carved early on in the season. And so we'll talk about what we have seen so far from the first 3 games and what to expect from the 2 on the schedule here the rest of the week as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. It doesn't have to be a winner or a loser either. If you had the Minnesota Wilds in this one tonight, you came up just short, but hey, if it was your first $5 bet, you still get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So win or lose, head to FanDuel.com right now. Hopefully you didn't have anything on the New York Giants. Oh, man. Head to FanDuel.com right now to take advantage of this great deal. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder for you, we will be keeping you up to date on the game against the St. Louis Blues tomorrow night. We'll have you covered pre and post like we usually do. And looks like there is some post-game audio, so we will have a variation of 3 things to recap things against the Winnipeg Jets. So keep an eye out for that coming later today here as well. Alex, let's talk about what we've seen so far from the first 3 games of the season. And I will say, I think the battle level has been pretty much where it needs to be. Like, obviously, you went through the emotional first game of the season against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they had an extra gear that they were channeling to try to really play for Johnny Gaudreau that night. So I chalk that up to just kind of do whatever it takes to win and grab the 2 points and move on. I thought the Wild did a lot of really good things offensively against the Kraken, but there were some lapses defensively and in the net that led to that one slipping away, and some missed opportunities in OT that could have led to the 2 points there, but you get 1. And the Winnipeg game, considering it was the second night of a back-to-back, it's a Winnipeg team that has gotten off to a really good start. They're a tough team to play against anyway. I thought for a road game, second night of a back-to-back, I thought it was I thought it was a pretty good effort by the Wild in that one. Came down to offensive opportunities again that you just couldn't bury. And so 3 games in, the results are similar to what we saw last year in terms of wins and losses, but it does feel like it does feel like the team has put better fight on the board. Just haven't quite gotten those offensive opportunities to drop consistently yet.
Yeah, other than the Winnipeg game, which, he looked gassed, but that's totally understandable. Boldy, I mean, he's playing like a superstar. I mean, the pass that he made to Hartman on that Hartman
was pretty
goal,
gross.
That was unbelievable. So, and there's so much pressure on him. You had Guerin talking him up to be a 100-point player, and so it just, he looks great. Fleury's play really concerned me. I don't know if the 40 game talk, that after what we saw against the Kraken, that just some of the goals he gave up, and I don't know, this team, it doesn't matter who's in net, and for whatever reason the shootouts are struggle. I don't. They're gonna have to practice that up. It's concerning.
It's so weird too, because this is something that we saw last year, and it seems like something that we've seen so far again this year. And I don't know if players are trying to do too much.
They're going over the net.
When Fleury is in net, it seems like the players are trying to do way too much to maybe help him out, which leads to missed assignments. Like I asked in the postcast after the Seattle game, because that Eberle goal where he literally is the only one within 10 feet of the net, other than Fleury, and he just taps it in like he's tapping in a 6-inch eagle putt.
Right.
And I'm like, whose fault is that? Like, and I, as a goalie, you really can't do anything about a guy being in that spot because you're focused on the play. And like the defense just completely lost Eberle there. And you have that, then you have the goal where Fleury got sprawled out in the crease and he gets pushed into the net because they can't find the puck. You have the shootout goals where it's like top shoulder. It just seemed pretty effortless.
It's demoralizing when you have multiple leads, at times of the game and give them up, and that Kraken team is not a playoff team. I just don't see them being they got shut out by Dallas last night. It just, that's a team you can't drop points to, when points are at a premium.
Well, and offensively, like the Kaprizov line, the Kraken had zero answer for them. No. And honestly, it felt like every single line was getting consistent push throughout the course of that game. And yet 2-0 turns into 2-2, 3-2 turns into 3-3, 4-3 turns into 4-4. Like that offensive output should be enough to win you most games.
No, 100%. And you're at home too.
You're at home.
Last change. Yeah.
So I would say of the 3 games so far this season, that's the one that kind of sticks in my craw at this point. But again, get
your wins at home. Take advantage.
Yeah. Yep. Especially before you go on a 7-game road trip. But I will give the team credit, because you don't see that just like deer in headlights look that happened so quickly at the beginning of last season. Like, you don't have guys just like skating around like they're on autopilot. They're battling. Like, right. You're seeing it even in guys like Marcus Johansson. You're seeing it in guys like John Merrill even too. They're battling for the puck along the boards, and it's stuff.
Every time I watch him, he plays hard. He really is engaged. That's what I appreciate about him. He's winning faceoffs. He won one late against Winnipeg. That was crucial. I've been impressed with the way he, how hard he plays too.
Yes, most definitely, and he really took advantage of getting bumped up to the third line, a little more prominent role. Their guys are playing hard. It's just they're not.
Production has to be there.
The production's got to increase, and it just would be nice to have a night where, like, again, something that happened last year. it'd be nice to have a night where like maybe one thing is off as opposed to like 3 or 4 different things all at once.
And we were talking about the schedule too. I mean, they have some really tough opponents coming up.
Yeah.
It is not easy, and it's going to be difficult.
You've got the St. Louis Blues tomorrow night. It is expected that Joel Eriksson Ek will be back in the lineup. He's going to travel to St. Louis to meet up with the team, so that's a nice sigh of relief. You've got Columbus on Saturday. Columbus is a team that they've got plenty of speed. So does St. Louis, and
they
so
just beat Colorado, which was
Colorado's a mess.
Yeah.
It's like it's going to be tough, but the blueprint is going to be in what the Wild did in most of the game against Winnipeg. Like you have to hold serve as the road team, grab the early goal, find a way to get it to the first intermission without giving one up with 1.1 seconds left on a designed play. So find a way to you got to find a way to get the early lead. You got to find a way to hold it. You got to find a way to add to it as the road team.
These national TV games against St. Louis that we saw it on TNT. We'll see if it happens.
Are you calling another 8-5 win?
Yeah, just chaos goals on both sides.
Yeah,
Binnington.
Hey, maybe we will get our Fleury Binnington fight.
Yes,
time will tell.
Yes,
but we'll see what happens, and of course, if we have any update on Jared Spurgeon or anything else, we'll make sure to keep you up to date as we navigate through year 2 of the 5-year plan here for the Minnesota Wild.
It's going to get its own graphic.
It's going to have to, because that's my goal for the rest of the season, is to figure out like what constitutes a win in year 2. We'll figure it out. We'll find it, as we always do. But that'll do it for today's episode. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, as always, as we continue to up the ante and grow the following here at Locked On Wild. We're knocking on the door of 2,900 here on YouTube. So if you have not added it yet, hit the subscribe button so you can be part of the Locked On Wild community. We'll see you tonight at 8 for the live show with Denny on YouTube. We look forward to what should be another fun time. Lots to discuss after the first 3 games of the season. So join us then, and join us all week long. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.